glad that you came this afternoon to spend this time with us. I'm Susan Wefald, and this is Nancy Willis. This is Nancy Willis. And Nancy and I work together on this project, and Nancy has asked that I be the lead speaker for the program, but she has many interesting facts that she would like to share with you as well. So she'll be doing that throughout the program as we answer questions and as we present to you today. Thank you, Nancy. Do you want to say anything at the beginning? Well, this project, people say, how did you get started? And we started this project last January, and I have read the book, The Overt Story by Richard Powers from 2019, and this book was the winner of the 2019 Pulitzer Prize in Fiction. A friend recommended it to me, and she said, this is a good book. She knows I read a lot. She said, you're going to enjoy this book. Well, I read that book, and it talked about the interrelationships of several different people. There's several stories that intercombine in this book. Have any of you read it yourself? Okay, a few out there. And people's relationships with their trees, and they go from the California redwoods to trees that are down south and trees that I grew up with in Michigan. And so this book made me think about trees. And so as I was thinking about the trees, because I live in a wooded neighborhood down by Cathedral of the Holy Spirit, I thought, what would be a project that I could do in Bismarck that relates to trees? And I was familiar with the Champion Tree Program in North Dakota. Are any of you familiar with that program where they have identified the largest trees in the state? All right, and I thought, I wonder if anyone has ever found the largest trees of our urban forest here in Bismarck. And I thought, I'm not going to tackle Burley County or anything bigger than Bismarck because there's enough trees here. In fact, the city forester says that we have about, are you ready for this, 22,000 trees planted along the boulevards and streets in Bismarck. 22,000. And that doesn't count the trees that are in people's backyards and front yards that they have also planted themselves. So what makes Bismarck so unique, well, not unique in North Dakota because we have a lot of prairie cities, but somewhat unique in the United States is that almost every single one of our trees has been planted by someone and then cared for and maintained by people. So to give you an idea of this, I picked a couple of slides to give you an idea of how Bismarck looked before trees were planted. So this is a little piece here now, just to give you an idea. Let's see, am I want to push? All right, you see that? See this little piece up here? That's Hillside Park. All right, you know where Hillside Park is, up there by Missouri Slope Home. Okay, the Capitol grounds. Here is Boulevard, right along here. Okay, now you can see that this picture is from 1946. Look at the area that's now up here to the west of the Capitol grounds. Not one home basically in that whole area. You can see that whole ridge. We know you have to go up the hill there to get to Missouri Slope and everything in that area. Okay, not one tree. Look at this neighborhood over here. Nothing, and that's right by the exit of the Capitol building. And just keep your eye on that sign. I'm sure it says, for sale, lots coming soon or something like that, because in the next picture I show, you're going to see some lots that have been put in. Okay, so now we're looking east of the Capitol building from up above, from an airplane shot. This is about where that sign was at that time. Now remember that spot, because in the next slide, I'm going to show you a great big huge tree, one of our champions of Bismarck that's growing there. But you notice this is 1953. Now, here is Boulevard again, all right? You can see that most of the homes are here in this part of town, have been built between the railroad tracks because it's still flooded in South Bismarck because the Garrison Dam, had just been put in. So not too many homes down there, but between the railroad track, which is about here, and Boulevard, where most of our houses going over quite a way east, over to that Hillside Park. Here's Cathedral of the Holy Spirit. Here is the site of St. Mary's High School, and here's Wilmore School, for those of you who need a few more landmarks pointed out here. But these trees, by 1953, they started planting trees in Bismarck around 1872 when the city of Bismarck started. And so you add on 18 to 53 years, so it was about 71 years that some of these trees had been planted in downtown Bismarck. And quite frankly, I'm going to show you a tree over in this neighborhood then that is again about 75 years old, a few, and you're going to see that they're large, mature trees. So in 75 years, a tree can grow quite large during that time period. Nancy, anything you want to add to that? No. All right, so what is a champion tree? Now here is the Bismarck. This is our largest linden tree in the city, and it's on 4th Street in Arikara, just about in the location of that for sale sign that I pointed out in that first slide. And this tree is about 70 years old. Now a champion tree is a very large tree of its species. When we look for a champion tree, it doesn't necessarily have to be the oldest tree. And it may not, and there may be trees nearby. I'm getting some feedback here, Eric, if you can help me. Thank you. He's going to work on the sound system because I know that's very uncomfortable for everyone to have that happen. When we look for a tree, it doesn't have to be the oldest tree in the area. In fact, you can have a whole row of trees that were planted at the same time, and one might be this big around, and the next one might be this big around, and another one might be this big around. And that's because you have the DNA of a tree, just like we have large people, and we have short people, and we have some people who are naturally lean, and some who tend to put on more weight. That's all due to a lot of that's due to our DNA, and so trees are the same. So you can have a tree that is 100 years old that can be smaller than a tree that is 75 years old, okay? So how did we find these trees as we went around? Well, this was a fun project for Nancy. Nancy, you can tell about how did we find these trees?
Well, mostly Susan was the one finding them. She and Bob were going around town looking. I had some that I knew of, but very few. She's the one that did it. But she also found them in places that were just, we were in the woods over in Sleepy Hollow. We were down at Eagles Park, and we were going through all kinds of brush. And it was a real kind of, what can I say? It was fun, but we also were out there with all the ticks and everything else.
Nancy was a great partner because she was not afraid of ticks. She was not afraid of mosquitoes, and she was not afraid of poison ivy.
We didn't have mosquitoes.
Yeah, so anyway, it was we picked a dry year, so we didn't run into a lot of mosquitoes. When we go out to measure a tree, we use this kind of equipment. We had a special measuring with a hook, so we could put it inside the bark of the tree and then march around the tree, and we didn't need two of us to hold it, all right? So that was very convenient. And this is 20 feet long, all right? And we received training from the city forester as we got started in January. Now, Nancy, take the end of this one. Okay. Okay, and so now this one we would use to measure the canopy of the tree, the crown of the tree, all right? And so let's say Nancy is the tree, and then we have the branches are coming out over the street and over the house, and so we needed to walk to measure from the tree, and then we'd walk the opposite direction, and then you get the crown, and so you measure that in 4 different directions, and then you take the average, all right? So that's how you come up with that measurement. And then the height.
Susan, tell them what else we did with that canopy.
The canopy, yeah.
We also divided that.
Right.
Into 4s.
Yes. Yeah, it was very difficult.
It was very disheartening.
In the woods, it's very hard to measure that. And then show them how we did this one then.
Okay.
This is for the height.
Yeah, and you hold it. When we posts that we had were 8 feet, 3 inches. And then you hold this, and you can see in this, there's a little mirror here, whether it's level or not. And you find through this, of all things, straw. The top of the tree. And then you will have the height.
And she walks backward from the tree until she can see the top of the tree, and then we measure the 4 feet up that she is holding this, and then we measure the distance to the tree, and that gives us the height of the tree. So we did not have to do any climbing, all right, in order to get these measurements. So on the sheets that you have, I'm not sure if it tells, yes it does. It tells you the average crown, the average height, and you add up those and you come up with points. So on this tree, you're going to see that this tree has a height of 75 feet, circumference around 12.2, average crown 56 feet, and its total score was 235. All right, so we were busy looking at trees and measuring trees and walking around town and finding wherever we would go for a walk, we'd be looking for what we thought were the biggest trees. And so here we are measuring a tree down at the Bismarck Municipal Ballpark on South Washington. This is the champion of Bismarck for our cottonwoods. This tree is 18 feet, 10 inches in circumference. Now, when you stand with your hands out like this, that's about 6 feet, all right? So here Nancy and I are about 12 feet, and you can see that it's about that much more around. This is a big tree. I like to stand by these big trees. It makes me look very small. All right? Yes, it makes you look very small. And so we had a good time doing this. All right, now in Bismarck, this is the old governor's residence, and it was built in 1884. And I had fun finding out a little bit about the history of tree plantings in Bismarck as we did this particular project. There were some newspaper articles that I was able to access. This one mentioned that the mayor of Bismarck, Mayor Bentley, in 1887 gave a presentation at the city council meeting. He said, "Another matter of importance is the running at large of cattle. It is no hardship, but a simple matter of justice that those who own cattle and live in town should take care of them and not permit them to prey upon their neighbors. Family cows are a necessity, but means should be provided preventing their becoming a nuisance. It is a very poor inducement to beautify our city by planting trees and shrubbery, only to have them furnish browse for roving bovines." All right, that's the mayor talking in 1887 to the city council. And this is what the problem was. We have to realize that our houses are based on different kinds of lots than there are today, all right? They were larger, and they usually had a carriage house or a barn because most families did keep a milk cow, and they probably had some chickens running around, and they may have had a horse if they had enough money to keep in their barn as well to ride or to use for their own carriage use. And so there was not enough grass in those yards, those surrounding those homes, and people had vegetable gardens and such too in those same plots. And so what they do is they would hire someone in town and that person would gather a group of cows during the morning, pick them up after milking time, walk them up to the Capitol grounds where they would graze on the grass, and then walk them home at nighttime. And the people who lived in the eastern part of town used Hillside Park for the same purpose. That was also a grazing area for cows. Well, as they would walk through the streets then on their way up to the Capitol building, munch, munch, crunch, crunch, they would be eating these new trees that had been planted and bushes that had been planted. And people got sick and tired of this because in order to get a tree at that time, most people had to go down by the river. They'd dig up a tree down along the river, and then they would bring it back home and plant it in their yard. And so they had gone to a lot of work already to plant a tree, and they didn't want these cows doing this. It wasn't until 1909 that the city council passed a law saying that cows could not be roaming and other animals through the city of Bismarck and eating these trees and bushes. And that's when trees really then took off in Bismarck, literally, all right? They started growing much more. However, there were people even before that time. In 1890, well, even after that, this is 1894 quote. This man said, we should have a forest city. Bismarck should be a forest city. It says, there is no good reason why Bismarck should not become the forest city of the state. It is an admitted fact that a judicious combination of Missouri slope soil and Missouri River water, nothing will refuse to grow. Each home might have its surroundings of shade trees and shrubbery, its grassy lawn and garden, which it did not have at that time, all right, because you had a lot of these little farmsteads where people had their cows and pigs and chickens and stuff, so there wasn't a lot of green grass around a lot of homes. They could have, and their garden, on the Arbor Day now approaching, the planting of trees should be general. Now listen to this. This echoes a concern I have heard around Bismarck very recently. So you're going to, I think, enjoy this part. If an arrangement could be made with the waterworks company, whereby reduced charges for water could be made for the watering of trees and shrubbery so that they can grow better. All right? So, haven't you heard people lately talking about reduced rates for water so they can have more water for their gardens? This complaint has been around since 1894. Okay. All right. Okay. So now, let's go back to look at some more trees here. Now, our boulevard plantings add beauty to our city. So now here is an American elm on 6th Street, and that's on your sheet. This is one of the largest American elms in the city. It's just south of McCabe Methodist Church. It's almost 1/2 the height of the North Dakota Capitol Building. The North Dakota Capitol Building is about 220 feet tall. I always know that because when I go on a hike and I'm thinking of climbing a hill, I look and think to myself, how many times do I want to climb up to the top of the Capitol Building, you know, on my hike. Now note the new tree planted across the street. The city does plant about 1,000 new trees a year in the city. The height of this tree is 106 feet. Circumference is 13.4. The average crown 90, and total points 290 points. This is a nice large tree. In this area of town is a little bit different from other parts of town. The areas of 4th Street, 5th Street, and 6th Street, coming up from Rosser up to Boulevard, are wider streets than many of the streets in other parts of Old Bismarck. And that's because those were some of the very first residential streets laid out in the city. And if you go down those streets, you're going to see that there's homes from the 1880s built in that neighborhood. All right, there's quite a number of homes in that neighborhood that date from that time. At first, there were 80-foot roadways in the city of Bismarck. But then in 1908, Bismarck city engineer Atkinson, T.R. Atkinson, a relative of Sister Kathleen. You know Sister Kathleen? All right, and there's other Atkinsons around. But anyway, a relative of Sister Kathleen, her grandpa, I think, made a recommendation to the Bismarck City Council that would beautify the city and save money on streets. So no wonder they liked the idea. He suggested building 56-foot roadways in residential areas instead of 80-foot roadways. As part of the narrow roadways, he recommended green strips called boulevards planted with trees between the sidewalks and the roads. So if you enjoy the fact that we have these green strips between our sidewalks and our street that are planted with trees, it is due to the foresight and the ideas of Mr. City Engineer T.R. Atkinson in 1908. The city council adopted his recommendations in 1909. So now, if you want to visit an area, so this is 6th Street. A number of these trees over the years have died. New ones are being planted, but that is one of the wider streets that you can visit in town that has some of our older neighborhoods and older trees. Now, if you want to see here, then they started to do city boulevard plantings. Between 1911 and 1916, this area of town, which is where I live, was planted with city boulevard plantings. In September of 1911, the first reference in the Bismarck Weekly Tribune that City of Bismarck would be planting trees as part of a street improvement project. So not only did they pave the streets, but they planted trees and they decided that they would maintain them. And that was an important step then in the growth of our city forestry program as we know it today. And this is a view of Avenue B West near the Cathedral of the Holy Spirit. And these trees were planted between 1913 and 1916. In fact, you see this tree here, I'll show you. This one, that one right there, it's across the street from my house. I thought that was gonna be one of the champion trees. No way. As I measured that one first, and it's about 10.5 feet around. As you see, we have found other American elms that are much bigger than that here in Bismarck. But it is a good sized tree, a beautiful tree, quite high and very nice. In fact, in the cathedral area, just south of in front of the bishop's residence there next to the cathedral, there's about 4 or 5 nice, great big elm trees that are there. And then if you go down to Custer Park was established around 1910 by the Women's Civic Improvement League, and they planted trees there on Arbor Day starting in 1910. And Nancy and I found a very large elm. I don't know if it's on the list in Custer Park. I'd have to look at the list again. But anyway, there's one down in Custer Park that's a great big elm down there that I think probably dates from some of those first plantings they did at that time. All right, now we have these Burr Oaks. I've talked a lot about elms and a linden. Burr Oaks usually grow in ravines, woody draws near Bismarck. You can find large Burr Oaks at Sleepy Hollow Arts Park and Pioneer Park near River Road. Why don't we see many oaks here in the Bismarck-Mandan area? They're a native tree to this area. It's because, and why we don't find large ones, during the time period when steamboats ran up and down the Missouri River, people were cutting trees for those steamboats so that they could have a fuel. Oaks were one of the first trees that were cut because they provided a good strong fuel for the steamboats, but also any oaks around people like that were left after that, people used for firewood themselves, or they cut them down for buildings because they knew an oak was a very good strong tree. So that's why we do not have many oaks. Recently though, people have started planting more Burr Oaks in town, and I enjoy seeing those trees on the street. I have one that happened to be planted by a squirrel or a bird in my backyard. And so I have one that's 40 years old and it's only this big around, but it's making progress. Oaks harbor a lot of animals and birds, and they're a wonderful tree. The largest ones you can find in town here, Sleepy Hollow Arts Park in the ravines, and Pioneer Park near River Road. If you just drive right down River Road, you're going to see a whole string of oak trees along in the Pioneer Park. Also, you'll see some on the other side in the woods still as the slope comes down to the park. Those aren't as large as the ones that are growing independently in the park. Now, our largest trees are the cottonwoods. And as I said before, cottonwoods grew in the riparian river bottoms